Very much, Acting Deputy President. I rise to make some remarks in relation to the Senate Economic References Committee's inquiry into the Australian Securities and Investments Commission. This is a committee of inquiry which has run for almost 20 months. The reason this committee inquiry was established was to get to the bottom of why ASIC had not been a successful corporate regulator. I was very concerned that people in Australia were not getting the services of the corporate cop as they should, that too many corporate crimes were going unpunished. Now, in establishing this inquiry, there was a significant amount of interference from the agency itself, which had sought to influence the vote the Senate took to establish this inquiry, which was quite improper. But nonetheless, the Senate decided to establish this inquiry, and I thank the crossbench for their support in establishing this important inquiry, which I think anyone who has a reasonable view on things would say has unearthed a lot of very good evidence which the committee secretariat has put together. Now, we tried to look at the way in which ASIC goes about its business through looking at cases, looking at the culture of the organisation and looking at the structure. The government and ASIC filed a lot of public interest immunity claims which hampered the Senate's ability to do its work. I would say that ASIC went out of its way to obstruct the inquiry, and there was no reason for ASIC not to provide redacted case files so we could see their investigative methods. Professor Alan Fells, who gave evidence to our committee, made the point that there's nothing secret about the investigative methods that ASIC is doing. And he made the point that if ASIC was a particularly good regulator, maybe there was something secret, but there was nothing secret to be hidden. I think ASIC, in the main, just wanted to obstruct the Senate's work. Now, ASIC really has one job, and that job is to be a law enforcement agency. We come to Canberra, we pass laws, corporate laws, financial services laws and the like, and we expect that the regulator will try and enforce those laws by pursuing civil and criminal cases, building a brief of evidence and winning a conviction in the court. Now, sadly, that is not the case in Australia, and that is why I believe that Australia has become, in many respects, a haven for white-collar crime. Now, there are so many cases that could have been catalogued in our committee report, but we decided to look at a few cases: Dixon Advisory, Newix, Calkine, Courtney House. In all these cases, ASIC was given multiple opportunities to enforce the law quickly. Now, as we've seen in the US, with the US agencies moving very quickly on the FTX collapse, where they were able to build a brief of evidence and then put someone away for many years, ASIC seems to take months and months and sometimes years to respond to complaints. Now, often the complaints have been made by insiders, whistleblowers. I mean, whistleblowers are treated appallingly in this country, appallingly. And so many opportunities slipped out of the hands of ASIC to stop what was a very bad situation with Dixon, Courtney House, Newix and Calkine. Calkine actually is still happening as we speak. And so the real impact in the community is that fair-minded people who think they're living in a country where financial services laws, consumer protection laws are enforced are frankly getting destroyed financially in many cases because of the inaction and the slow pace. So when it comes down to it, the investigation that we undertook looked at the culture, the leadership and the structure. In terms of culture, we were able to discover through our inquiries the staff survey of ASIC, and it found that staff motivation was at 20%. Staff satisfaction was below 20%. It's a very sick agency. We also, unfortunately, had to spend a lot of time on looking at the massive dysfunction at the commission level, where commissioners were at war with one another, leaking to the media, engaging in all sorts of unsavoury business and activity. And unfortunately, there were also secret investigations into commissioners which weren't made known to the public, which were covered up by ASIC. And I think the culture of the organisation from top to bottom is extremely sick. In terms of the structure, and I don't want to be too unfair on ASIC, the structure it's been given by this parliament is one that it cannot be successful in. Since the Wallace inquiry of the mid-90s, ASIC has been given more and more things. We started out with 2 peaks in the Twin Peaks model, APRA, which was given prudential supervision from the Reserve Bank, and then ASIC, supposed to be focused on consumer protection. But every time there's been a problem in Canberra since 1997, it's been given to ASIC, and ASIC is now a monolith. It is so big, and it can't possibly be successful as a sprawling financial services regulator and as a companies regulator. And it does the registration of businesses, it looks after market integrity, derivatives, insurance, liquidators, investment banks, private equity, takeovers. It is far too big, which is why we have recommended a new structure for corporate law enforcement in Australia, which would be a splitting of ASIC up and a creation of 2 new bodies. 1, a companies regulator, and 2, a financial services enforcement agency. So 2 separate bodies, one focus on companies and the enforcement of the corporate law, and one focus on financial services regulation. We think that is a very important structural change. Secondly, there needs to be much more transparency around how complaints are handled. And where there are convictions recorded against people or against organisations, criminal and civil penalties, there should be a searchable register. People should be able to see what has actually happened in the past. And I believe that in relation to whistleblowers, we should be rewarding whistleblowers who take risks, often with their own lives, to call out appalling conduct in corporate and financial services in Australia. And so we've made strong recommendations in relation to whistleblower protection, but also in relation to whistleblower rewards. In terms of the structure of the new agencies, if they are adopted by this parliament, I think the idea of a commission structure is dead. There is too many opportunities for buck passing, and I think that in future there should be a statutory appointment of a CEO of each of these new agencies, which can be held to account more easily by Parliament and stakeholders. I also think that in relation to the funding for these new bodies, we ought to find a way to lighten the load on small business. Small businesses, particularly in the financial sector, are paying enormous levies to ASIC, and I think that there is a better way that we can do that. Now, I want to just make 2 final points before I sit down, and that is that this is the 3rd such inquiry in the last few decades into ASIC by the Senate. There was one in the early 90s, which was done by Chris Ellison, and there was another one done by the Labor Senator Mark Bishop about 10 years ago. And they both made what I would say were deck chair on the Titanic style recommendations. We have gone for a complete change here into new agencies and the end of ASIC, because I don't think it can be fixed culturally or structurally, and so that's why we've made this perhaps controversial recommendation, but I think it's the only way you can fix the situation. This has been a process which has asked a lot from a lot of people who didn't have to engage with the parliamentary process, but they have, often for no personal benefit other than to make sure that we could catalogue the evidence. And the evidence is that when ASIC receives complaints and warnings, it doesn't act. And so I want to thank all the people who have bravely come forward, whistleblowers, insiders, people who've been wronged. I want to thank them very much. That your voice has been heard, and your voice has now been put into what I believe are very strong recommendations, which have been adopted, I would say, in large part by the government and by the Greens, because there are no dissenting reports. This is a report of the Senate with some qualifications from government senators, but largely speaking, I believe we have done a job here which the public expect, which we've tried to work together to find common ground. So I want to thank the Secretariat very much for the huge body of work that they've done here. Such fantastic public servants who make us look really good. But I wanted to just close in thanking all the people that came forward to put on record their very concerning evidence.